This is the Enochs Show, America's most controversial podcast, coming to you from UNT. That's the University of North Texas. And I'm Lee Enochs.
I am Jackson Carter Polmeyer.
And I'm Brock Bergen.
Our man with sports. And we'll be talking a lot of stuff at the end here. Michigan beat Ohio State, some crazy things. But we've got our esteemed guest. Walter, this is the fifth time we've had you on our show. You're basically our most favored guest. Because I think there's a major reservoir of knowledge from the libertarian side that needs to be fleshed out or flushed out more. So, Walter, this whole thing of Javier Milei of Argentina, the president-elect from Argentina, what's your take on it? Is his views pretty similar as from what you know of yours?
Very, very. I'm delighted. This is magnificent. I mean, I'm jumping up and down with joy. He is an anarcho-capitalist libertarian, which is the most, how shall I say it, extreme or most consistent with the libertarian principles of non-aggression and private property rights. And he's an Austrian economist, as am I. So I'm tickled pink. I'm delighted. This is magnificent. This puts us on the map in a way that we could never be. And personally, he's quoted me like 6 or 7 times, and he uses the F word on my critics. He says, if you disagree with Walter Block, F you. And, I don't know that I'd put it quite that way myself, but I certainly have to appreciate that. And also, he lists me along with Milton Friedman and Hayek and Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe as Robert Nozick and Ayn Rand as libertarians. And I'm just delighted with that. He has 5 dogs, and one of them is named after Murray Rothbard. So you can't get any better than that. This is just magnificent. And as Donald Trump said, he's going to make Argentina great again. MAGA, make Argentina great again, instead of or maybe in addition to making America great again, would be the view of Donald Trump. So to answer your question, I'm just tickled pink and delighted.
Well, you answered one of the questions pretty clearly that I was going to ask you. Had you ever have any contact with him, or do you think he's ever read your stuff? And that's the answer. But I just thought about this.
Well, he must have read Defending the Undefendable, because as I say, he uses the F word for people who criticize Defending the Undefendable. Although I have to confess, as soon as I heard that he ran, I have his I have his email address, and I wrote a letter of congratulations, and he did not yet respond. So I imagine he is inundated with 60,000 emails and hasn't gotten around to me. But I must have written, I don't know, maybe 10, maybe not as many as 10 op-eds, all praising him and making the claim that no, he's not a Trumpian, no, he's not a conservative, he's not a right-winger, as everyone seems to think. Rather, he is a libertarian, an Austro-libertarian. And as I say, I couldn't be more delighted.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm going to try to reach out to the new Argentinian government. If I can get a hold of this guy somehow, or some of his people, to do a quick interview, something similar to this, I'll see if I can get you involved in this. See if we can, long shot, but we'll see what we can do. We'll put our feelers out and see if we can reach out and see if we can potentially. Does guy speak English though? And that's the only problem. It's like Spanish thing.
Another thing that I wanted to mention is that he is also very pro-Jewish. He just visited New York, and he visited the grave of Rabbi Mendel Schneerson, the previous Hasidic rabbi who's the leader of the Lubavitcher rabbis, which are the most Orthodox Jews. And this is especially appreciated given the Hamas-Israeli situation, where so many people are blaming Israel for the savagery of what's going on there, when it was Hamas that started it. So I appreciate him on many different dimensions: economics, personal liberties, Israel support. I just can't tell you how tickled pink I am with his ascendancy.
I figured you'd say as much. I just want to make sure that there wasn't some kind of, there's various strands of libertarianism. Like, I was not a supporter of Gary Johnson. I didn't like that guy at all. I'm not sure. It wasn't just his views. It's kind of weird. Like, you're not as pro-life as me, but something about Gary Johnson just didn't sit well with me. And even Rand Paul and Ron Paul didn't support Gary Johnson. I thought he was a bad pick there for the nomination. Was that 2016, or a couple times he won the nomination. But I didn't know if this guy, Melee, had any kind of different kind of wrinkle on libertarianism than you did. But it seems like it's pretty much the same view. And so that gets into our whole thing tonight. I'm not sure if you're a James Bond fan. Have you watched any of the James Bond movies, Walter?
Oh, sure, sure. But before we get into James Bond, I just wanted to mention that um, uh, Javier Milei is an anarcho-capitalist philosophically, but in terms of practicality, he is a minarchist. So what's the difference between anarcho-capitalism and minarchism? The difference is the anarcho-capitalist is the most radical of the libertarian movements and the most consistent, I think, with the non-aggression principle and private property rights. And it says that even the government per se, any government, all governments are illicit because they tax people. And taxes are involuntary payments. And the only payments that are legitimate are when people agree. And no one has agreed to pay taxes, no contract that anyone ever signed with that. So he is only a anarcho-capitalist in theory or philosophically. But as a matter of practicality, he's a minarchist. So what is a minarchist? A minarchist is somebody who says, well, government is justified and government taxes are justified. And the only focus of government should be to protect the people in the country. And to that end, there are only three institutions that are legitimate. One of them is a military, armies, Marines, Air Force, to make sure that foreign people don't invade our country, not to export democracy all over the world, not like the US having 800 military bases in foreign countries, but just for defense. And the second function would be police. Police to stop robbers and murderers and rapists, but not to stop victimless criminals like voluntary sexual pornography, prostitution, gambling, drugs, whatever. And the third is courts to determine who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and if there's a contract dispute to mediate between them. So as a matter of fact, Javier Milei will not be getting rid of the Argentinian government. Rather, he will be reducing it. He'll be getting rid of, first of all, the central bank, which is magnificent. And he'll be getting rid of all sorts of programs that the government shouldn't be operating and privatizing them. So he's not against retirement plans. He's not against health plans. He's not against welfare. He just wants to privatize it. So we should have private charity, and we should have private retirement accounts. And my motto on this is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. He would go along with that, except for armies, courts, and police. So that would be a little divergence between the two of us. But boy, oh boy, am I a fan of his.
Well, I figured you would be. But getting back, one thing I saw just earlier today says that we'll have no dealings with communist governments. That's a direct quote. Like, he says, we're going to have nothing to do with communist governments. But the problem I see, and then we'll get into my James Bond thing, is that, so you have a pretty socialistic government there, like whatever their equivalent of parliament or whatever. It's going to be hard for him to push a lot of his stuff through. Right? He's going to, I could only foresee, like, wasn't it like Jimmy Carter or somebody? There was a major president come to, Trump, it was hard for him to get a lot of things done because you had a aggressive Congress that was against him. I could only foresee that he's going to run into a brick wall of opposition amongst, people in government there, but, I'm very happy to see this, how it's going to work out. But Walter, let me give you let's segue to this whole thing about privatization of water. Okay. So I thought about some of the conversations we've had since you've come on, and I've been thinking it through, and maybe I'm pretty close to you in many ways on your views. Well, at least I want to believe, but help my unbelief. That's a direct quotation from the Bible. I want to believe, but some things are a struggle for me. So maybe I've just grew up in the shadow of the Great Society and the New Deal legislation, and maybe that's influenced me more than I know. But I just expect certain things from the government, like I know you don't want to ban the government. You want to see some things like like you said, court system, not for fraud, but things like drinking water. So are you saying that you want to privatize drinking water, or that, like, how does that work? I mean, you want to privatize everything, right? That's a title of a book. So does that mean, like, when you go to a store or someplace, the office building, and you're just used to having a drinking fountain there, that it should have like a quarter slot on there, or nowadays maybe a dollar slot on there, and put a dollar in, right? Like, how does that work with water? And I've got several questions I want to ask, because that's a basic thing that when all of us grew up on this kind of view that water is an essential thing that we need in life, and that the water that we get out of our tap should be clean. It shouldn't be like Flint, Michigan, where it's got lead and poisons in it. So are you saying that there should be a fundamental different relationship? Like the water that we get from the tap and from the, for anywhere, it should be like, they should charge us, or water should be, how does that work in your concept? I know we get drinking water that we got to purchase at the store. You're saying there should be no quote unquote free water. That's not something the government should provide for its citizens.
Well, I have 4 books on this subject. One is why we should privatize everything, and then specifically why we should privatize roads and highways, why we should privatize space, and why we should privatize water. And I'm delighted that you've asked me about this one book, Privatizing Water. Now, look, just because you privatize it doesn't mean that there won't be water for free. Bathrooms are privatized. Government doesn't own bathrooms, and yet a lot of places, filling stations, supermarkets have free bathroom service. Not that there's anything wrong with charging bathrooms for bathrooms, which is why sometimes it's difficult to get a bathroom in a public space, because the government owns the streets and it won't allow you to charge for bathrooms. But look, the water fountains, I think most people would still offer water for free. And it's not government water. You go to a mall, or you go to an airport or any place like that, and there are water fountains all over the place. So I think we don't want to conflate free and government, or think that only government can provide things for free. Private enterprise provides things for free. You go to a Walmart or you go to a Costco and you park for free. So parking is free, even though it's not governmental. And why is it free? Because it's they want to encourage you to come to the store, to the filling station, or whatever it is. So I don't. Yes, there would be bottled water as it is now, and they charge for bottled water, but there'd also be water fountains in various places, and people could slurp up as much water as they wanted, because water is very cheap. But let me make the general case for water privatization. Let me start with Mississippi River. Mississippi River should be privatized. Why do I favor the privatization of the Mississippi River? Well, we had Katrina. Katrina was a gigantic storm, and I'm a professor of economics in New Orleans, Loyola University, New Orleans. And Katrina didn't quite hit New Orleans. It was 40 miles east of us, but we got a little bit of it. But 1,900 people died. Now, why did 1,900 people die? It's because the levees fell. The levee, New Orleans is located under the sea level or under the water level. So you need levees to keep the water out away from us. And who put in the levees? The Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers is a governmental enterprise, a governmental institution. And from a personal point of view, we all regret that 1,900 innocent people died. That was horrible. But from an economic point of view, that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is that the Mississippi River is still in the same hands of the people that were responsible for 1,900 deaths. Imagine, God forbid, if McDonald's killed 1,900 people. If McDonald's killed 1,900 people, there'd be no more McDonald's. You'd go to Burger King, you'd go to Wendy's, you'd go to Domino's, you'd go, I don't know, to other fast food places. The whole reason that we have a civilization, that we have nice hats and we have nice shirts and we have nice ear monitors that you guys are wearing, and that we have Zoom and all, is because of competition. If you do a good job, you make money, you can expand. If you do a bad job, you lose money. And if you keep doing a bad job, you have to go do something else, and other people take over. That's why we have a good civilized standard of living. Well, I just want to apply that insight that comes from Adam Smith, and I want to apply it as widely as I can. And one of the places I want to apply it to is water. Well, let's take the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River should be owned by the Mississippi River Corporation. Who should own the Mississippi River Corporation? Well, according to John Locke, the way we get to own any property is by mixing our labor with it. So who's been mixing their labor with the Mississippi River? Well, those guys that have all those boats that go up and down in the Mississippi River, and everybody on the side, east side or the west side of the Mississippi River, we assume had something to do with the Mississippi River. So you give all those people a share in the Mississippi River Corporation. And now they're listed on the stock market. And I don't know, that maybe there are 100,000 shares and 100,000 owners of the Mississippi River Corporation. And they put in those levies. And if they fail, there's going to be new management. So that would be one reason why we should privatize the Mississippi River. Now let's talk about privatizing the ocean. The ocean is part of the water supply, and we should privatize the ocean as well. And the way I like to introduce this one is I talk not about James Bond, but about Star Trek. And in Star Trek, what happened was our boys, they were in the 23rd century, and the guys in the 26th century were kicking the crap out of them. Why were the guys in the 26th century kicking the crap out of our guys in the 23rd century? Because there were no more whales. And they like whales. So our boys, the guy with the pointy ears, Spock, and Jim, Captain Jim, they had to come back to the 20th century to get some whales to bring to the 23rd century so that the 26th century guys would lighten up. Well, why are we running out of whales? The reason we're running out of whales is a thing in economics called the tragedy of the commons. When you own stuff in common, you don't take care of it. The best example I have of this is the buffalo and the cow. The buffalo and the cow are roughly the same animals. The biologists are going to be upset when I say this, but I'm ignorant of biology. I'm sure there are vast differences, but to me, they're the same animal. And yet one almost went extinct, the buffalo, and the other never came within 1 million miles of extinction, the cow. And what's the difference? The difference is not any biological difference. The difference is that we own cows privately, and we had the tragedy of the commons with the buffalo. The buffalo were never allowed to be owned until very recently. And it's the same thing with the elephants and the rhinos in Africa. They're going extinct because of lack of private ownership. Well, the same thing with fish and whales. The ocean is a commons. No one owns the ocean. We should have the privatization of the ocean, and then the whales will be as safe as cows are. So that would be a case for privatizing the oceans. And now let's talk about aquifers. Or drinking water, or reservations of water. Or you mentioned, what was it, Flint, Michigan, where they had crap in the water and you couldn't drink the water? Well, whose water was that? That was governmental water. Imagine if the private enterprise were in charge of the Flint, Michigan water supply, they'd be booted out, and we'd get new owners, and then the people in Flint, Michigan could have good water. And it's the same thing with aquifers. I mean, what they do in California is they subsidize water, and then they grow rice in the desert. And rice, you need a lot of water. So this is just a gigantic misallocation of resources. So that would be the 10-minute case for privatizing water, whether it's oceans or lakes or rivers or mud puddles or whatever it is. Water should be privatized. And when we go to the moon, and when we go to Mars and there's no water there, well, yes, we have to have water if we're going to live on the moon and live on Mars. And who should we trust to give reliable water? A government, which if it screws up, doesn't lose any money. I want to get my favorite quote from Thomas Sowell. Hold on one second. I should have prepared this before. Where is my quote? Come on, Thomas Sowell. Where are you hiding? I'm going to get you. Can't find it. Come on, Thomas.
Well, Walter, while you're doing that, let me just say this. The James Bond quote I was going to mention was that in a movie, the 2008 movie Quantum of Solace, there was this like fraudulent environmentalist who was really like this evil guy that wanted to basically own the entire water of Bolivia, if you remember that, and basically charge exorbitant price for the people of Bolivia just to be able to have water. Like if one person or one company owns all the water of a nation, or could they just set it at any price they wanted to and put it out of the range of the average people to be able to purchase it?
Well, now we're getting into a different issue. We're getting into the issue of what it would be antitrust and monopoly. And suppose they cornered the market in I don't know, rice, or they cornered the market in water, or they cornered the market in oil, or they cornered the market in whatever it is. This is an argument against free enterprise, and I'm glad you brought it up. But before I answer it, let me just give you this Thomas Sowell quote, which I carry around with me all the time. And what Thomas Sowell says is, it is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. I don't know if you can see it, but I just read it out. I knew it. I could have given you roughly the gist of it, but I wanted to give you the exact quote. And this is the idea that when the government owns the Flint water supply, they pay no price for being wrong and poisoning the water, or allowing the water to be poisoned. So I think Thomas Sowell is very apropos. Now, with regard to cornering, you see, one of the reasons that it's so tough to have privatization of water is that it's part of the cycle. The water sits in an ocean or in a lake, and then it evaporates, it goes into the clouds, and then it comes down out of the clouds in the form of rain, and it goes into the aquifers, and then it gets evaporated. So it's a circular process. So it seems very difficult for any Bolivian or anyone else to get all the water, because all you have to do is go up on your roof and put in a cistern on top of your roof, and you'll get water whenever it rains. And the idea that any one person could buy it all up would be very hard to understand how it could occur, because the more you buy up, the higher the price gets. And eventually the price gets so high that even Bill Gates can't afford to buy water. So I think that would be a non-issue, or rather it's an issue against capitalism and free enterprise not only in water, but in everything. Lima beans. I mean, you could have a thing where we corner the lima beans and only one guy has lima beans, and now he jacks up the price of lima beans. I think this is not really a good criticism of privatizing anything.
Well, let me ask you a question. I think for the first time in the history of humanity, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and James Bond are in the same conversation. So if you remember that book, The Jungle, that was like in the early 20th century during the progressive movement of like Teddy Roosevelt and whatnot, there was in a meatpacking industry of Chicago, there were like just atrocious things being put into hot dogs and meat and whatnot. Private companies were putting sawdust in hot dogs. And so the thing like the FDA was created to hold companies to a certain kind of standard to not have like, so I guess the argument for, from the left would be that if you have unbridled capitalists, they're not even going to serve you legitimate meat, like so explain to us now, why are you saying that? I mean, is it possible that if one company like has a monopoly on something, right? Like, are you saying that it would be like fraud if they don't provide like a pure water or pure food? So how do you hold a company accountable to not give out fraudulent goods or poison water or poison food?
Well, I think if they put sawdust in the meat, they're guilty of fraud and they should be put in jail. And so that whole issue wouldn't come up. But if they engage in any kind of fraud, if they say, well, it's really beef, but it's pork, that would be fraud as well. That would be false advertising. I think the law would just prohibit that. But I think you're touching on a very, very important issue, namely, how do you secure quality, not only for food, but for doctors, for dentists, for services, for other kinds of food, whatever. And here you have to distinguish between two ways of doing it. One way is licensing, and the other way is certification. Now, governments, what's the difference between licensing and certification? Licensing, if you don't have a license, you can't practice. It's illegal for you to practice. So if you don't have a license to drive and you get caught on the road, they'll put you in jail or give you a big fine or punish you in some way. I have a doctorate, and my doctorate is in economics. And if I open up a shop saying I'm a physician, I'm a medical doctor, I would go to jail for that, because in order to practice medicine, you need a license. So that's one way to ensure quality. Government licenses people who pass a test or who pass an inspection or something like that. The other way of ensuring the quality of goods is certification. Perhaps most people are familiar with CPA, Certified Public Accountant. In order to be a certified public accountant, you have to pass certain tests. But certification means you can practice without the certification. So if I set myself up as a bookkeeper or an accountant, I don't go to jail. If I say I have a CPA, then I do. But I don't have to say I have a CPA. So that would be certification. What are the certification industries? Well, Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval is one. You know how they test mattresses that we sleep on? What they do, a mattress you sleep on, you can sleep on for 10 or 20 years, and you can't have a test for 20 years to determine whether a mattress is good or not. What they do is they get this machine that pounds the mattress at a certain rate and at a certain power for a week or so, and that would be equivalent to people sleeping on it for 20 years. So, what's the best way of making sure that we have good quality of food and water and medical services and everything? I think it's much better to have certification rather than licensing, because certification is done by private certification agencies, whereas licensing is done by the government. And if the government screws up, well, then it's hard to imagine a more stupid or dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. If the government screws up, they pay no price for being wrong. Let's take medical licensing. Medical licensing is evil. What are they, and you're talking about monopoly. The reason we have a monopoly is because the American Medical Association wants to keep people out of practicing medicine in order to jack up the prices that doctors make. Doctors make, what is it, 6 times as much as PhD biologists. And in my research, the reason I chose PhD biologists and chemists, I figured they could go to medical school. They have the smarts and the ability to be doctors, but the AMA restricts entry and keeps doctors very few. And one of the things that really bugs me is with regard to foreign doctors, they make them take the exam in English. And a lot of foreign doctors are perfectly good doctors, but they can't speak English that much. And the AMA and the licensing bureaus say, well, if you can't speak English, you can't practice. But they're unconscious patients. And you don't need a language with an unconscious patient. And then there are people like, say, a Korean doctor comes over here. He could treat Korean people better than an American doctor who doesn't speak Korean. And third, there are translators. So what they're doing is precluding entry. They're restricting entry in order to jack up prices. This is a governmental monopoly. So I think it'd be much better, say with drugs, the FDA. You mentioned the evil FDA. There are a lot of what do you call it? Drugs, experimental drugs. I have cancer. No, I don't. But suppose I did. I have last term cancer, and this new experimental drug, and the doctors say I have 2 weeks to live, and I want to try it. And the FDA won't allow me to try it, those bastards, because it might not be safe. Well, I've only got 2 weeks to live and I want to try it and they won't let me do it. That is evil. That is vicious. That is depraved. So we'd be much better off without the FDA. And I hope that if there's an FDA equivalent in Argentina, one of the first things that Javier Milei does is get rid of it and enable private enterprise to certify drugs. So maybe with this experimental drug, nobody certifies it because it's too dangerous. Well, then I can still use it. And then if a certification agency approves of a bad drug or doesn't approve of a good drug, they go broke. So we would then have a much better quality of drugs and medical services and food and water and everything else under the sun if we had certification rather than government licensing. So here again is yet another case where the critics, the progressives, so-called progressives, they're actually regressives going back to mercantilism. They love government licensing. But government licensing is evil, and private certification industry would be a much better way and a much more moral way of making sure that we have good quality products.
Walter, believe it or not, we're closing in on our 40th minute with you. We're going to wrap it up in a couple of minutes here, but I want to give you one last question. So just for my thinking here. So the issue of monopoly, going back to that. So let's say there is this kind of James Bond scenario. I'm gonna set up a hypothetical situation. Let's say America, like Argentina, like for some reason, in a few years from now, I mean, not for some reason, but I mean, it's clear an American political system is broken. But let's say somehow, some way, Rand Paul and Liberty Republicans or whatever kind of get major press or something happens where they become the majority in the Republican Party and somehow, some way, some kind of libertarian viewpoint ascends in the United States. I mean, in the government. So somehow we privatize water, okay, and then some company or some evil person comes like Elon Musk or I'm not, I kind of like Elon Musk, but let's say somebody with just tremendous amount of money, tremendous amount of power, controls all the water, the drinking water in the United States. What prevents like a monopoly from one person just taking over and withholding that to just average people? Are you saying a monopoly is wrong, or how do we prevent monopolies in a libertarian structure, or a monopoly that would prevent other people from, let's say, you're talking about that whole water system you could use to, let's say, are you saying that it would be wrong for this company or this businessman to prevent another company from being able to gather water? Like it, are you saying that there shouldn't be a monopoly like that? Other people should be able to sell water too, or am I making sense there? I'm just trying to say, how do you prevent one company or one person from holding all the water resources in the United States and selling it to the highest bidder and preventing common people from being able to get it?
Well, the classic case of this was John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil was supposedly getting a monopoly over oil. That's the standard economic case. First of all, we have to distinguish between monopoly and single seller status. Monopoly means that the government prevents someone from competing, like licensing would be a monopoly, and certainly a monopoly in that sense would be incompatible. So what you're really asking is, can, under the free enterprise system, can there be a single seller status that people arrive at without government prohibition? And all I can say is that if you're worrying about water, that's the least thing you should worry about. You should worry much more about oil, because water keeps coming down every couple of days. It rains, and if somebody owned all the water, which is preposterous, but suppose somebody owned all the water, well, in 3 days, it rains, or it rains every day somewhere in the United States, and somebody's going to gather more water. Now, if he has a monopoly, what he could do is then forbid anyone else from getting water. But we're not talking about monopoly. We obviously oppose monopoly. We're now talking about single seller status, and that would be impossible with water because it keeps raining. Now it's much more likely with oil, but and John D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil was accused of doing this, but the economics of it were the very opposite. The reason John D. Rockefeller made so much money is that he was better at refining oil than other people were, and that's the source of his income. Not because he had all the oil in the world, because people are always discovering more oil. People are always discovering more of everything. So single seller status is very difficult. Look, suppose I want to get a monopoly of I don't know, diamonds, and I start buying up diamonds. Well, the more diamonds I buy up, the higher the price people are going to hold out against me. It's going to be very, very difficult to get a single seller status for diamonds, or for oil, or for lima beans, or for chairs, or anything else like that. So, but there is a single seller status already that is a monopoly, and that right now the government owns all the water. The government runs it, and look at how well they're running it. They're not doing too well in Flint, Michigan, and yet there's no way to stop them, based again on Thomas Sowell's quote. So I hope I've allayed some of your fears on this single seller status, people taking over all of some thing and then jacking up the price. It's just a myth.
Guys, you got any questions for Walter before we let him hop off? The busy man. We really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything you guys wanted to ask?
I don't think I have anything. I mean,
Not really.
Well, Walter,
I hope
you're
I've
highly
converted you to the one true faith.
Well, I'm not far from you in many. I want to believe, like my Bible says, I want to believe. I've something before you go. I just want to say real quick. So I read this article in the New York Times last week, and it said the New York Times said this. And this changes subject. Let's move away from water and whatnot. But it said about the mandates, about the COVID-19 mandates. I was a vicious opponent of the COVID-19 mandates. Just seemed like it was so inconsistent. So you can have a liquor store open, but you can't be at the beach, or you can go to a Black Lives Matter rally, but you can't go to church. And, okay, it was just very inconsistent the way that they did that, right? But it came out in the New York Times. The editorial board of the New York Times said that the mandates now, in hindsight, were the worst possible thing for American education system in the history of America. That they prevented students from going to school, and it listed all the reasons. That just a loss of, it's saying it set back education system at least 20 years. Not only that, high suicide rate of kids. There's all these things, but it was that newspaper was the very entity that was championed the mandates. I just thought that was utterly ridiculous. Now, I don't know if this is even a libertarian argument or anything. I bitterly oppose the mandates, the lockdowns. It just seemed like, really behind it all, I'm not sure if you guys knew this, but there was a movement about rebooting Western civilization, the big reboot. Like basically you had very liberal, controlling, socialistic people like George Soros and whatnot. They wanted to reboot America and use the occasion of the coronavirus pandemic to restructure society and could take control of the entities of Western civilization and bring it under like a socialistic control. And Walter, I mean, did you read that op-ed in the New York Times last week about? I know it was around Thanksgiving, so a lot of people are busy, but it came out and said it was the absolute worst thing possible. But it was your newspaper that was promoting this. And actually, not only that, people lost jobs if they didn't take the vaccine. Like there was such the whole thing was, I think, a socialistic overreach. It tried to bring the whole civilization under control. It was just clearly obvious to me from the get-go. We never talked about this, but that's just my take on that. I mean, it was just, you want to close out your segment here on hindsight 3 years later. Now, do you think that the pandemic was a socialistic overreach to try to bring America under control of socialism?
Look, I hate to invite myself on your show again, but this question deserves a whole hour or a whole 45 minutes or whatever. Let me just say very briefly that COVID affects people of 70 years and older. And in retrospect, what they just should have said is we advise people who are 70 and older to be careful and, wear masks or whatever. But to shut down schools for 10-year-old kids was just silly. But I think that this whole question deserves much more than I can do in 1 minute. So I'll stop there.
There's a Dr. Jeff Miller who was on our show. He's a USC trained medical doctor, pretty conservative. What I think I'm going to propose is that somehow next semester, we're going to get Dr. Jeff on the show with you, okay, and basically talk about the mandates, the coronavirus. I'm still scarred by that whole stuff. They closed a gardening center at Walmart. That was closed, but the liquor aisle was open, just completely inconsistent. And you had these leaders that were telling you, you can't leave your home, but they're like Gavin Newsom of California, forcing people, they can't leave their home, but he's off at some kind of French restaurant or some winery in Napa Valley. it's just very inconsistent thing. But Walter, we want to thank you once again for coming on our show for the 5th time, and we'll circle back sometime after the new year to get you back on the show. So thanks a lot. We're gonna have you hop off, and we're gonna talk about sports and some closing things for the semester.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me again. I look forward to the next time. Take care.
All right, thanks, Walter.
Bye.
All right, so guys, I know that was a lot of minutia. That was an inside debate. I'm not really convinced completely, but he cleared up some things. So basically, the monopoly, one company owning everything. It basically, he answered it pretty clearly. It would be fraud. If you like, let's say there's some company in Denton that's got these great hot dogs. In California, we'd call that a righteous munch. A righteous munch, man. It would be we'd go down to the beach and there'd be some great pizza down there. Let's say one of our favorite restaurants we ever had, right? I'm partial to In-N-Out Burger. We find out that, let's just say there's this hot dog place in Denton. It's just every time you go by, there's long lines, right? We find out that they're putting sawdust in that place, right? Like in the hot dog. So basically, he's saying that the contract, or like at least the social contract that company is making with society, that they're providing a righteous hot dog that's like tastes well, but it's also healthy. If it has sawdust, it's breaking its contract, its social contract, and being fraudulent with the goods that they're providing. They're really not providing hot dog. They're providing a sawdust laden hot dog. So I think that's what he's saying. So before we have Jackson Carter Pallmeyer close out with some final thoughts, Brock, let's talk about football here at the end. So your prediction, what 2 teams will be in the Super Bowl? Will it be Philadelphia and Kansas City again, or are you going to shock us with some new teams?
I go out on a limb here. I'm going to change this pick just the air. And after seeing this, after watching Sunday Night Football, I'm going to go with the Ravens against the Eagles.
Wow, you're making a big step up. The Ravens are that good?
They're that good, but even then, they've had a few seasons where they've been really good and then just choked in the playoffs. But I don't think this is going to be the year they do that. I think Lamar Jackson is that good. He's just putting up record numbers for his career. This receiving core they have is a lot better than what they've had in previous years. Their offense is way better than they've had in previous years, and I think it's going to be them beating against the Eagles, who are just the all-around best team in the NFL.
Do you remember several years ago when Carson Wentz, you must have been elementary school, but Carson Wentz was doing really, really well, and then he got injured.
2017, he was putting up MVP numbers, and he gets hurt against the Rams, and Foles takes them all the way.
All the way. Now let's say Lamar Jackson gets hurt. No, God forbid, I don't want to see Lamar Jackson get hurt. Okay, but let's say he does. That changes everything, right?
If he goes down, then that goes from Super Bowl hopes to being eliminated in the first round.
Wow, that shows you a power one player.
Right.
So, okay, there you have it, folks. He's saying, forget Seattle, forget Detroit, forget the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys show me nothing. I don't care if they win 14 games this year. They still lose to San Francisco, and they lose to the Eagles.
It's a yearly thing. They beat up on bad teams and then lose the playoffs.
And Dak Prescott can throw 4 or 5 touchdowns against a really weak team, but crumble and throw a bunch of interceptions against San Francisco or Philadelphia. I'm not impressed. Until you win. Al Davis used to be the owner of the
just win, baby.
Just win, baby, of the Oakland Raiders. Speaking of Oakland, so basically the A's are leaving Oakland and they're going to Vegas, right?
The owners in the MLB voted on relocation, and they're going to be moved to Vegas. They're going to start playing there in 2025, I think. So it sucks for the people of Oakland that just rode by their team for the past 30, 40 years.
Well, no, not 30 years. We're talking 50 years.
Right. It's even longer than that.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? Oakland gets what they deserve. Oakland has not provided a good stadium.
I mean, that's true. It's like the fan base did all they could, but it's like it all comes down to their ownership. Their ownership never wanted to pay their good players. That's why they're they're a perennial losing team. They didn't want to pay their good players a few years back. They're treating their minor leaguers horribly too. It's just so much wrong with their ownership, and that's why they're done.
You know, I'll say this, that the difference between the Golden State Warriors and Oakland A's is the issue of ownership.
Right, because the Warriors have been just a winning team every year for over the last decade, mainly because their ownership wants to win games. They get the best players they can. Their fan base shows up as a result.
I guarantee you that if every single year, Oakland put out a product that they were winning, and you know, they surprisingly did really well many years with that weak ownership. And you guys, there's not a worse stadium for baseball than the Oakland Coliseum.
Right,
Just
that
some
place
trashed out stadium.
They found like rats and mice in the dugout. They found that, and they found like sewage there too. The stadium is usually 90% empty every single game. Their minor leaguers are having to eat like this like brown bag crap that they're giving them.
Top ramen, AAA players eating top
It's
ramen, you
like-
know.
It's just horrendous all around. Like,
So let's segue into college football before we close out our sports segment and leave it to our war hero name, at least Jackson Carter Pallmeyer. I watched the Ohio State Michigan game, or I really was watching it pretty carefully. And Michigan beat Ohio State fair and square.
they sure did.
Okay. But you still have the issue of it doesn't erase the whole thing happening with the sign stealing scandal.
That's true.
You know, that I am not a person that believes that they won those couple years because of the sign stealing scandal, but I am saying at the bare minimum that Jim Harbaugh, if he didn't know, which I believe he did know about it, but let's say I'm wrong, that somehow he lost institutional control, knowledge, that there was complete sign stealing operation happening under his nose as the coach. But he's responsible for that. You have to know what's going on. It's
Right.
Rick Pitino of the University of Louisville, okay, lost his job and the NCAA championship that they've won.
They had their 2013 title stripped from them because of all that.
Yeah, because basically he lost institutional control, and Rick Pitino is really self-righteous. I did nothing. Man, you had prostitutes. Your team was coaches were entertaining prostitutes and offering big money to players to come to the University of Louisville.
Yeah, they got caught. So.
And if Rick Pitino, so shouldn't a coach know pretty much about everything that's going on in a team?
Pretty much. I mean, I would say Harbaugh needs to there's no way he didn't know, honestly, at this point. There's no way he didn't, just because if there's some guy roaming your sideline every single game and all that, he's claiming he goes to your school, and he's on the sidelines of like other teams' games. He's got to know something about that. I still feel like that.
So I love the University of Michigan. Okay, I'm texting Brock while I'm a major paper due. Hey man, Michigan, what's his name? Looks pretty good. What did I say? Something about Marvin Harrison.
Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, like a great wide receiver. I think it'd be foolish if he didn't go pro. Right. He's a top 3 or top 5 draft pick.
He's going top 3.
Yeah, I mean he's that good. Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver for Ohio State, is a phenomenal player. As the season winds on, give us the 2 teams in the final game that you think that who are the 2 best teams? Is Michigan and Georgia the 2 best teams in college football right now?
I would say that's the safe pick. FSU's up there too, but even then, Jordan Travis, their quarterback, just suffered a brutal injury just 2 weeks ago. So that's all in jeopardy.
Oh, yeah, he's out, right?
He's out for the season. I don't know if he's out for the ACC championship or the playoffs, but if he's out for both of those, then it's not looking good for them, because they struggled against a mediocre Florida team on Saturday too.
So the teams that are undefeated right now are Washington,
spreads: Washington, Michigan, Georgia, and FSU.
Could Alabama, if they beat Georgia, they're in the Final Four teams, right?
Essentially, if they beat them, they'll probably need a bunch of other stuff to go their way. But if they do win, they're definitely going to be considered.
So are you saying Georgia is the number one team in the country again?
I'm still going to roll with them as the safe pick here. I'll roll with them as like.
Could Michigan possibly potentially beat Georgia?
It's possible with that new offense they're running, all of that. It's definitely possible. But I still think Georgia's going to repeat.
So when TCU beat Michigan last year in the college playoff, was it because the speed of the team was just so fast? Like it seemed like TCU's wide receivers were just much better than the defensive backs of Michigan, or
Right.
they just
Their key to beating that Michigan team was that they pounced on them early. They just did not let up the entire first half, and it kept up the entire game. Even if it did end in a close game, they still were on them immediately.
it seems, sign stealing scandal or not, that Michigan has even improved from last year's team, that they have honed up whatever they're doing. I don't know if they're getting inside information or what, but Michigan looks a lot better than even the team they had last year.
Right.
So, Brock, it's been great having you giving us sports update this whole entire last semester and a half, and we're going to look forward to talking next
For sure.
next semester. So, Jackson Carter Pallmeyer, you got any closing thoughts before we close out the semester?
I think as far as libertarianism goes, that rather than competition, I think that community is going to be the way that we grow in the future. I think that putting the hands of all of our resources, putting all of our resources into the hands of the owners of a few companies is fairly similar to putting it in the hands of a few people running the government. So I think we should consider, taking it into all of our hands collectively so that we can all take care of it.
So, are you
together.
arguing like kind of like a democratic socialism, like a kind of like a view that we'll have to flesh that out next semester? We'll have to get.
I don't think you can rely on a few people to look out for what's best for everybody.
Yeah, that's the one thing I would have to say about the weakness, if there's any weakness. And I am very sympathetic, and I didn't mean that I believe, but help my own belief. I am very capitalistic, very, very libertarian in my views. I don't want government control. I don't want government interference in my personal life or whatever. But I definitely don't want sawdust in my hot dogs. And I don't want some greedy person out there. Now, as we close out, there was now one thing, some of my audience out there is Christian. And someone might say, well, Lee's like letting people take God's name in vain in my show, all that. No, I mean, it's just I didn't know that was going to happen. You guys, and I think I'm going to have Ethan edit that if that somehow does not edited.
What happened?
Well, he took God's name in vain right on on the show,
I don't.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to repeat it, right? And one thing I do by tradition, you guys, because this will be the last show before the holidays. I'm definitely a Christian, definitely be an essential gospel of Christ that He died and rose again from the dead. I do believe in the virgin birth of Christ, and want to wish everybody out there a good. I know we're a few weeks away from Christmas. Wish everybody a great Christmas. It'll be the last podcast before next semester. It's been great having you guys on. We had some crazy talks about UFOs this semester. I think you guys have some major potential. You guys have really honed your craft. You're both invited back on next year. As we start off the semester, probably in towards the end of January, we'll get back going again. Okay, guys? Wish you guys great holidays. This has been
Jackson Carter Pallmeyer
and Brock Bergen.
This is Lee Enochs. Wishing you guys a great holidays. We'll see what happens with all the NCAA playoffs and
For sure.
with Dallas Cowboys. They can't really get in there. You think that there's no way Cowboys are winning the Super Bowl this year?
Nope.
All right, there you got it, folks. Have a great holiday season, guys. Take care now.